Scott Richards, welcome to the Passion Project.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Dude, thanks so much for being here. Super
Absolutely.
stoked. This has been a while that I've wanted to get you in here, so I'm stoked that you made the drive like 2 miles up to get here to do it.
It took a while. Took a while for 2 miles. Stoked to be here.
Thank you. So to kind of set the stage, this is a bit of like, this is your life. Like, we're going to talk about Scott Richards. We're going to share with the audience, who is this guy and why is he here? We're going to talk about you because your path is really, really cool.
Yeah.
And your business history. So we're gonna talk about you and like all the formative stuff, and that'll bring you to your current world, which is Slightly Choppy. I met you through your business, Slightly Choppy, and it's one of my favorite. Truly is one of my favorite. That's why I'm so stoked to have you here. And we'll talk a lot about it. And we'll talk about the genesis of it and what you guys do and where to find you. But more than that, or before that, I really want to get into the backstory because, you know, here we are in the Newport Beach, Costa Mesa area, and we've both been here for a long time, but you didn't start here.
Nope.
And we're going to talk, I look forward to talking about how you ended up here because not only have you got this really successful business that you do now, but what you did, you worked for coveted, some of the most coveted big surf industry brands. Your story's rad. It's so cool. So, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. So, Scott, we're going to start with the history of where you grew up, if that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So can we talk about where, because I really look forward to, like, again, what brought you from there to here and into this world that you're in, which is so cool. Yeah. So let's go. Where'd you start?
Well, you know, most of my childhood was spent in Detroit, Michigan. So I spent a lot of time, obviously, just playing sports, delivering newspapers, shoveling driveways of snow, raking leaves. So besides being a kid who was really into sports, I always had a list of chores to do and things I had to do around the neighborhood or things I'd sign up for. So growing up in Michigan, it's like you're in the outdoors a lot, in whether it's hot or it's extreme cold. And so, you know, I had paper routes and climbing through snow with my brother and my sister, and then shoveled a lot of snow.
What's a paper route like in the middle of winter?
You know what? Boy, I still have some fond memories of delivering for the Detroit News. So Detroit News is pretty rad. And so we just have to show up in a big concrete structure and, you know, get your 120 papers, whatever it was. We'd have to roll them up, stick them in bags, and we'd wear, you know, back in the days, a big snowsuit, moon boots, big gloves, and we'd have a sled that we'd just pull our papers.
Were you on a bike during summer and pulling absolutely. A sled during winter?
Yep. But we had to deliver papers to the doors. So it wasn't necessarily you're just pitching them like you see in commercials and things like that. We had to take them up to the door.
How many days a week?
Let's see. It was 7 days a week.
So you're doing this before school.
My route, and I shared it with my brother and my sister, so my portion was after school. So it came in the afternoon, and then the weekends were early mornings. So we had to just kind of divide and conquer. And I remember we were laughing the other day. I think after we split and collected and looked to see what we made, there were some weeks I was making $7. And I remember my dad pushing over my coins and my singles, and it was like, all right, there you go, buddy. Nice work. Keep it going.
Now, were you stoked on that $7? Was that big or was that small?
You know what? I didn't know any better. It was great. I mean, it was what I was getting paid doing it. So besides, you know, mowing lawns, raking leaves, shoveling snow. Eventually, I started working at restaurants and just had a restaurant experience.
But you were always busy. Was that something your family pushed on you, on the kids?
Yeah, we always had a good work ethic. And then my best friend's dad, the Gurneys, Don Gurney, put that fire in me to just work hard. Don't make excuses. It's just something you're just constantly driving nails. And so I have no problem digging ditches or, you know, sweeping something or cleaning something up. It's not the quick and easiest way. I like doing it just the true, honest, hard work way of doing it. So I feel like those initial kind of work ethics just set me off into my career. It's something I've just always done. So not afraid to work.
You still have that work ethic?
Oh, I absolutely. It's hard not to have.
So I'm getting ahead, but you've got 2 boys. Has there been osmosis on? Have you trained them the same way that you were trained? Do they have that same kind of work ethic?
You know, I wouldn't say it's as intense as we had it when we were younger, but they both are willing to
To grind.
To grind, for sure. But that's a great question.
Well, it's fun. Well, right, we always wondered, are we making our kids stronger? Are we making them softer? Like, living in a different area? Well, the reason I was asking you about growing up there, and I was inquiring about the paper route, because growing up here, like the paper route, you can wear flip-flops some days or shoes, depending on how cold it is. Like, you're not getting snow, you're not wearing moon boots. And so it's just a different lifestyle. Again, now you're wearing flip-flops. Or,
different now,
so
for sure.
What was your... It sounds like that was a family-driven kind of work ethic. Family life what was it like growing up there? Other than this is the work side. Family was cool?
So family was good. I grew up in the church, so I'm a pastor's kid.
Oh.
And so my dad was a music minister. And so we did travel around, relocate to different churches and things like that. So the time in Detroit was through third grade till, I finished up high school, basically. So I grew up in the church, spent a lot of time in youth group and getting to know everybody within the church and the school and things like that. So it was a pretty tight-knit group of people that I went to school with, that went to church with, and then kind of related to people I worked with. So I had some good friends. I don't get to see them much anymore, but I still stay in touch with them back in Detroit, which is cool.
Rad.
Pretty cool.
That's super neat. Like I always say that for this podcast, my goal is that hopefully someone that knows you well, learns something. Like, I'm guessing that not a lot of people knew or know that you are a pastor's son.
Yeah.
So there's one, right?
There's one, exactly.
But super interesting. So, it's ironic. My mom grew up in Ohio.
Okay.
And so she tells about those winters and just a different animal. That's why I'm so curious, because it's so different. But that's rad. School, did you have like a passion for anything specifically in school at that time?
So when I was young, I would say, probably getting into junior high, I was still into soccer and basketball. Those were my sports. And then when I was a freshman in high school, I kind of got into a bit of trouble and got kicked off the basketball team, got kicked out of all school sports when I was a freshman.
Pastors,
me? Come on, exactly. How does that happen?
How'd that go over with Dad?
You know what? My dad was very supportive of this situation. And so that is when I got into skateboarding, actually. So I started skating as a freshman in high school and started getting into music and fashion and skateboarding. And so that was probably a pivot to me to start leaving ball sports and start getting into skating, eventually surfing, snowboarding.
Was there much of a skate culture there?
It's a great question. So thank God, I was probably, I've mentioned this before, I was probably one of very few people who subscribed to surfing and surfer magazines. So I got both of them every single month. In Detroit.
Yeah.
So in the very back of the issue, you remember seeing like contest results and maybe where Surfer was distributed. So there were a couple shops out in Michigan. I can't even say Detroit, but there were places in Grand Haven, Michigan, Rockport. There were a couple surf, skate, snow, not even snowboarding, but ski.
Yeah, this was pre-snowboard,
really. It was pre-snow, really. And I would have to wait months to try to get a ride to go check out Wind, Waves, and Wheels in a certain town across from Michigan, to just go and see what skate wheels look like. Because we had to, back then, it was Val Surf that we had to order all our, skateboard equipment and stuff from. So it was not easy. There weren't many people skateboarding. But after my parents, so even as a pastor, my parents divorced and really put some challenges on us as kids. But it did give me the opportunity to, when my parents split up, my mom came out here to California. My dad stayed there in Detroit. And I'd spend summers out here.
Oh,
so that's kind of where, when I'd spend the summer out here, she lived in Huntington for a bit and then San Clemente for a bit. And so I got to, for the summers, start boogie boarding, start surfing. And after spending all summer like that every year, it was hard not to let that influence who I became back in Detroit. So I was a total wannabe surfer living in Detroit. And it was through my entire high school year to where I kept skating. I was getting more and more into fashion, looking through the surf magazines. It was hard not to want to be part of that lifestyle, but 2,500 miles away.
Yeah.
So
It's really
very
amazing
different.
because we talked earlier, I'm a couple years older than you, but we were growing up very similarly, but incredibly differently. So we had the same focus. I went from ball sports to skate to surf, and everything else went out the window once I found surf. But the difference was I was here, so I could do it year round. I was in the mecca, the middle of it. I could be at a surf shop in 5 minutes or a skate shop. Everything was at my fingertips. You didn't have to think twice. Like, you need a skateboard? You need new wheels? You wanted to see all that new stuff? Everything from the magazines was down the street. I could skateboard there. And here you are trying to figure out how to be a skater, surfer.
Oh, we had to earn it.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Way tougher than we are out here.
For sure. I remember collecting cans. We'd get $0.10 a can. We'd collect cans for months, and then we'd go buy skate gear. So we'd get some OJ slime balls. Is that what they were? Just the real soft like 54s or whatever they were. And get it, it would take a while to get a deck and just pull it together.
And surfing started. So you're in Michigan still. You're coming here in the summers now for mom.
Yep.
You're surfing here, and then you're going back there. Are you surfing there at that time?
My poor mom, I made her take my board to the airport, and I'd actually ship my board to Detroit. So I had a board sitting in my room, and of course my walls covered in posters. And let's just say I knew every surfer. I knew the industry. I read every word front to back of every magazine. So I really was getting to know a lot about the culture and the industry, if you will, from a different perspective, from being on the outside of it. So not to fast forward too much, but you can see why when I came here to surf, as soon as I finished high school, I couldn't wait to start school. I went to school at Vanguard, which was SEC, Southern California College at the time, and I pretty much moved here so I could go surf. So that's when.
So real quick, that's rad. Let's talk about. You finished up high school. Was college ever a plan? Did you have a vision, or was it just move to California, or did you have more what's next already thought out, or?
Very little. I was really into film, and so I wanted to be in cinematography and film production.
Okay, so you already had a creative
kind
bone.
of.
Okay.
I've always had a creative bone, obviously. As a young kid, digging through trash cans and keeping stuff and just hoarding materials. I was always making stuff, no matter where I was and what I was doing.
So there's a fair bit of foreshadowing already here,
oh my gosh.
Right? So between collector and digging through stuff, reading every word in the surf magazines, skating and being super, I would imagine in the middle of winter, living where it's cold, at that age, there's not as much to do as what we get to do here year round. So those magazines are pretty, you're dreaming of summer, and you're going through it.
Let's just say I was teased a ton back in Detroit about wanting to be a surfer.
Were you dressing the part?
Well, obviously. I was just talking the other day about this red corduroy Schroff jacket I had. And I wish I still had it to show Peter and say, dude, do you remember this thing? But I had Jimmy's, OP, Town and Country.
Were you a bit of a black sheep at that point, dressing like that there? Or was it, so we're talking the late 80s.
Yep.
Surf is, 80s and 90s were the heyday of surf.
Yeah.
It's getting big. It's really big here, but was there little tentacles of it there?
Not as bright the colors. There were definitely neons, but it was definitely more of a street. Breakdancing was big in the mid 80s, and we had a place called Bobolo Island to where it on the border of Canada and Detroit River, and we'd have to take a ferry boat, a little 3-story ferry boat, and the second story had a DJ booth and a breakdancing floor. So whenever we went on field trips and went to Bobolo Island, we'd be breakdancing there all the time.
Oh, what's it called? Bobolo?
Bobolo Island. Not Balboa Island.
How funny is that?
Bobolo Island, exactly.
Just change a couple letters in there.
So the fashion was definitely street. There were some baggy pants and skinny ties, and there was some cool stuff happening. But then the California influence definitely kind of mirrored. And so it was hard to, I couldn't fully dress like I was from here, there, but it was a melding of the two.
You had a bit of it going.
For sure.
As much as you probably could.
Oh yeah, I couldn't help not to, for sure.
Got it, but you were always dreaming of surf.
Oh, I knew that's what I was going to do.
So what did you do?
And
you moved out. Let's talk about it.
So I moved out here in 1989. So started going to school. That was my good excuse, to allow my parents to come out here when I was 18.
Where were you when you moved here? Where did you move to?
I moved into the dorms
Oh, okay.
On campus there, where Vanguard is now. So I was living in the dorms, got to know a few guys who served, and it started becoming my daily routine. Got a bus boy job at Tony Roma's down on PCH.
I remember.
So working at Tony Roma's at night, going to school, maybe 15 units at school, and then starting to surf every day.
And this is 19 years old-ish?
I was 18, yeah.
So rad. And
so I was loving it.
was mom living out here at the time?
She moved to Phoenix by then.
Okay, so you're out here on your own.
I'm out here on my own.
Got it.
Yep.
Was that pretty fun?
Oh, yeah.
Living the dream?
It was my first taste of real freedom and being able to really balance trying to be responsible, but also just, these wings were cooped up for so long. It was finally the time to where it was like, if there was swell, it was like I was constantly on it, going to Mexico every weekend, surfing up and down the coast all the time. So plenty.
Well, I would imagine.
Hit it hard.
Well, I would imagine coming from being cooped up, passionate about surf magazines for years, and being able and just ballsing up and moving out here, and then just being full surf turkey and paying for it, right?
Oh yeah.
Going to school, working at Tony Roma's, surfing as much as you can.
Yep.
Sounds pretty freaking good to me.
Oh, I wasn't complaining.
Okay.
I was living my best life for sure.
And
for sure.
What was college a means to an end, or did you start to find your way there, or?
You know what? It was kind of my holding place. It was kind of like my reason to be, my excuse for being down here. And it just didn't click like I thought it would. I think when I knew I wanted to get into film, and I didn't like having to do all the GE, all the early classes. And I was
general
like,
ed
really?
stuff?
I got to do general ed for the first 2 years before I get into what I wanted to do. So when it was like 2 to 3 feet and offshore, and it was like, are you kidding me right now? I'm supposed to go sit through a U.S. history class right now? I started skipping class. Let's just say I burned out and the surf bug just took over. So I was just surfing, dropped out of school, and working at Tony Roma's. And that was my life.
For how long?
For probably a good 2 years. But in the middle of that is when I met my wife, my girlfriend. We weren't looking, we were both out of relationships, not looking for anything. We met at Tony Roma's, and her dad was like, young man, if you want to date my wife,
or date your daughter?
If you want to date my daughter, sorry.
You don't want to date his wife.
If you want to date my daughter, you got to be doing something. You got to get back into school. So I remember he really put the pressure on me to really figure things out, figure out what I wanted to do. And I was already doodling. I was always drawing in a sketch pad and dreaming up things. And I wasn't just drawing what I saw. It seemed like I was always scheming little projects and creations, and they were thumbnails about big plans and big ideas. Right. So it was never just like, oh, I'm going to just draw a little landscape or still life or something like that.
It's super interesting.
Always had that critical thinking. I just didn't know yet what I wanted to.
So that was so it sounds like you're at another pivot point, right? You're like, I'm doodling. I like to do art. I don't want to pursue this cinematography thing. I'm kind of done with my. I don't want to do my GEs. I'd rather go surf. My girlfriend's dad's telling me to get busy. So what'd you do next?
So that's when my wife and I, or my girlfriend at the time, she turns to me and goes, well, you like to draw. What about art? And so I never thought of it as a career or something. It's so easy to comprehend now because I think with desktop publishing, anybody can be a graphic designer, digital artist, if you will, or at least be able to hack it and get through it. But back then in the early 90s, art and graphic arts was not very popular. It wasn't something my elders were advising me to get into. So I started going to art school. I started at OCC, taking life drawing, color design, 2D, 3D, interior design. I mean, just any class I could get my hands on and just start building up my portfolio and get into just trying to work toward the degree. So I went there for about a year and a half, transferred to Laguna Art and Design.
Rad, right in the canyon.
So right in the canyon. And that was some of the best times of my life. So I went there for about 3 years, got my BFA, finished up. I did the 8-year school program, which I'm not ashamed of.
How'd you pay for it?
You know what? That's a really good question. I got not 1 cent from my parents.
Wow.
And that wasn't because they couldn't help. They wanted me to earn it. And so it was something that still proud of to this day, especially when I was not, really into it back at SEC and I was paying for those expensive credits. OCC was much more affordable and approachable and figure out what I really wanted to do. But then art school, to work on my BFA, I got a little bit of scholarship money and then paid it all for myself. And so between Tony Roma's and then moving over, parking cars at the Yankee Tavern, that really helped kind of get me through art school. And so
Dude, good for you.
Did
That's
it all
incredible.
myself.
8 years of education, out here by yourself, paid for it all on your own.
Yep.
That's incredible. Good for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I always commend people that I was very fortunate. I didn't have, my parents made college a job. You keep a 3.0, you get done in 4 years, and we will pay for it. Keep your nose clean, don't get in trouble. But I know a lot of people have had to pay for it all on their own, and it's I think of myself trying to. It would be a whole different world. So I give you big praise. Good for you.
Thank you.
Here's an interesting kind of sliding doors thing. As we said, I graduated 88. You graduated 89. I went to University of San Diego. I have an art degree. But were you? I've also got a marine science degree. I thought I was going to be Weiland meets Jacques Cousteau, and I was scuba instructor. So that was my vision.
Nice.
And we'll talk more about that later because it ties into you. But you just mentioned how you were when you were doodling, you weren't replicating. You weren't like replicating what you see. You're doing these schemes and things. I think you said you're these like storybooking stuff out. I'm the opposite. You're like, if somebody says, "Hey, Mark, paint the sunset," it's going to be as close to photorealistic. Like I have no creative ability to look at that and go abstract or anything. Yeah. And what I found was I was born with an artistic ability, but no creative license in that. Yeah. So and going through art school or my art degree, I learned a lot about watching other people that had that creative mindset. It blew my mind. So I realized that was not the world for me. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot, and I've been able to apply some of it in my business. But I realized very quickly, watching other people that were super creative, probably like you, like, okay, I could be an illustrator, but I could not be a creative artist or a fine artist at all. So I give kudos, again, to people like you that have this ability to go, let's go make something.
And I'm not the greatest artist, but I've had to learn to understand different styles, appreciate how people get to what they're doing. There's so many different talented people that have different gifts for different aspects of things. And I guess when you start making art your career, you have to learn to appreciate it, understand it all, figure out how it's done, especially when you have to start directing people. So later on in my life, eventually being able to art direct and creative direct, I've had to figure out what the best medium would be, who's the best artist or creative for that, who's got the style that fits with what you're trying to portray. And so there's so much of it that early day art and interest in it that really kind of fueled my career that eventually.
Well, let's talk about that because you started to mention the computer-aided design didn't exist the way it does today. Like you couldn't really get into graphic design unless you're really a fine artist with the skill, which is exactly what you were talking about. Because I remember the very earliest programs. It was so
it's crude.
So crude, exactly. Yeah. So where did you focus in art school? Was it a blend, or did you early find the direction you wanted to go towards one side or the other?
So when I started going to the Art Institute or LCAD, I went for drawing and painting. So that's what I thought I wanted to do. I love to paint, I love to draw, life drawing, just all types of aspects of illustration and art. But I noticed, and my instructors noticed, I kept pushing messages and typography and kind of, not necessarily graphics, but I was always trying to convey a message in what I was trying to deliver. So when I saw true fine artists, they were trying to keep it as pure and honest, and in the meantime, I saw the art being almost like a vehicle of getting a message across or what have you. So I went for drawing and painting, and I left a graphic designer, visual communicator. And that was a new kind of degree that they were working on. So down there it's a figurative art school down there in the canyon. And so it was drawing, painting from life, models and things like that. Then into fine art, people who did oils and acrylics and things like that. And then illustration, so you could illustrate for books or for animation or for other spot illustrations and things like that. Well, I started figuring out the computer early, the software early, how to start getting your ideas down and convey them from sketch into digital thumbnails and mock-ups and things like that. So it just became, the computer just ended up being a tool, just like the number 2 pencil was my best friend forever, still is, but to be able to convey it digitally now, and of course that's where the whole world is. It's so amazing what tools are available.
But I would imagine, because you started at the ground level early and it sounds like you were compelled to really master those software programs, that must have given you a leg up after school, that you got into the computer skill set early? Or
let's just say all the graduating fine artists were running over to me to help them put their resumes together, their portfolios. I don't even think we had websites at that time, so they weren't needing a website. But definitely, it just, being a designer just helps you understand the creative process and creative approach, but there's that critical thinking to what you want to convey. You think a lot of things through versus just throwing something up on the wall. And so that really helped before just executing and putting color or shape or form on something, to have a concept, have an idea, try to figure out if this was, are you trying to move or persuade somebody or inspire somebody? Are you selling product? Or are you just whatever, That's where I guess the commercial world starts coming into it. But I had, and I still do, have a strong foot in studio art, and then understanding the creative process, whether it's marketing or advertising or branding, what have you. So
there's so much.
I love straddling those two.
Well, there's so much foreshadowing in when we get to Slightly Choppy and talking about your current business that you created, there's so much when you start to connect the dots going back. Everything you're talking about sounds like it's led you here.
For sure.
All of those pieces and parts. Let me ask you this. While you're in school, and let me just say real quick, Laguna is known as an art city, but much, much more so 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago.
Sure.
Today, it's less so. It's a little bit more commercialized with Sawdust Festival and
the pageant
of the Masters and Festival of Arts.
Yep.
It's all rad, but
Yep.
And there's still lots of fine art there. But I would imagine back then it was much more of it was a very well-known artist colony of sorts still then, right?
Yeah.
So that must have been really interesting, like who the professors were. Must have been really interesting, and I'm guessing formative to some degree.
Well, I love it too, because now that I'm pretty much the age of some of my instructors at that time, it was cool how every single one was a practicing artist. So I just saw them as the instructor giving the assignments and having some back and forth, but little did I know they were still practicing and creating in studios, and they had their own process, and they're thinking about like, I got to prepare a project for the kids this next week, but I look back now and go, wow, like it's pretty insane that I've been able to just jump in to something I absolutely love, be surrounded by other people who, either are as passionate or driven as I was. In a sport, especially when it took me that long to get back into school, when I went back to OCC and LCAD, I was fired up. I didn't miss a class. I was giving 110% to every project, and even some to where I was getting competitive. Like it got pretty competitive, but it was so rewarding. It was some of the most fun years of my life. But I learned a lot of things there, not just art application and how to collaborate, but how to critique also was really important.
It's a big part of art, is learning to critique. I found that I was really good at poking holes in other people's work. I did not like it when they poked holes in mine.
No, I find this really interesting because it benefits in just life in general, because you don't always want to just point out the bad things that someone did or something's happening or something you don't care for. So when we had to critique, we had to start with something positive, even if it was a train wreck you were looking at. Try to come up with something positive, have constructive criticism, and then end on a positive again.
That's leadership 101 right there.
It's wonderful.
Right?
And I never took leadership classes, so maybe it is. But it was something to me to where you
That's called a compliment sandwich.
Perfect. That's exactly what it is.
Compliment, critique, compliment.
Exactly. So it's like, okay, your mat is well cut, without even talking about the art. And then constructive criticism. You take the subjectivity out of it and make it objective. Does it work? Does it not work? Like, is it, because it's so easy to, I don't like it. It's so easy to have an opinion on something. But if something is either commercial art or it's trying to achieve a goal or something like that, hey, it may not be something you would do, but it works. It served the purpose. So there's a lot of things in life that it was cool that I learned from critiquing an art class, how to then approach things in life. If someone asked me, if someone's working on their, design for a new house or their bedroom or certain color, you just kind of step back and just kind of.
It's a good trait to have.
It is a good trait.
That's Absolutely. Really smart. I hadn't thought of it that way. Maybe because I didn't know the compliment sandwich approach back then. I don't think I got it. I don't think it was given to me either. I think it was all critique.
Yeah.
2 quick questions. One, had your wife, at the time your girlfriend, had not stopped you and said, hey, what do you think about art? Do you think you would have ended up, it sounds kind of random, but you said it. She kind of stopped you and said, hey, what about art? You're always doodling and drawing.
It's really weird. It's not that, I didn't know that in the back of my head that that's what I was going to do as an artist or creative in general. I think I was so smitten by surf culture and getting out here to surf to where I know this sounds hilarious. I had no idea what I was going to do for career-wise. Even as I was still going through art school, I didn't know what the exit strategy was. I didn't know what kind of career I was going to do. I guess also living in Detroit, why I wanted to get into film. I've always loved movies and the cinematography and production design of things, which is kind of connected to art, at least photography and understanding
composition, etc.
Composition, lighting, and things like that. But no, my wife and I still laugh at it, how it just kind of worked its way out.
Wow. Well, that was going to be my next question is, if I had a magic wand, I always ask these questions, magic wands, but if you had a magic wand in school, what your dream career would have been. But I think he just heard you say, like, I didn't even know.
I had no clue.
Got it.
No
clue. That's perfect entree to the next level, which is, so you finish school and you get a job. You want to talk about, you finish school, what you were thinking, where are you going to go, or how you ended up going the direction that you went?
So obviously surfing was my number one passion. My girlfriend was a passion also at the time, but surfing and school were my priorities. And so I wanted to figure out a way to combine the two. So I didn't want to just go get any job anywhere. I was a very green, out of school graphic designer, and it was still very new to figure out, like, networking was just very different then than it is now. There's not LinkedIn, there's not like, oh, it's posted online, job description, whatever. There was none of that then. So it was a little difficult. So it was definitely word of mouth and I had to do some cold calls. But my first job eventually that I took was with a small agency called McElroy Communications. And Tom McElroy and Tim Richardson interviewed me and hired me on the spot. And that was in 97. And McElroy Communications at the time was a small ad design studio that was doing, branding and campaign development for G-Shock and Vans and Mammoth Mountain and K-Rock Radio and Activision video games. It was all based on youth culture. So I remember the day I went for an interview, I was told at school, dress the part, make sure you dress up. So I came in with wearing a nice tie and my hair was all nice. And I was just, had my big portfolio and I was coming in with all the little collateral to show that I was buttoned up. And they were just a bunch of skaters, surfers, just punks that were just giving me the funniest looks when I walked in. And
Who's this dork?
Who's
right?
this dork? Exactly. And I'll never forget when I left that day, Tom's like, don't ever wear a tie again. Don't ever. And so from then on, after I got hired, and that was just, I was cutting my teeth with those guys. It was so much fun just learning how to build ads and storyboard TV commercials and how to work with a copywriter and how to just develop stories and, the art of persuasion and get to know the product and how to create a fun way to communicate that. So it wasn't bad. It was super fun. And that was my first job out of school, and I didn't know any better.
Well, and I think in hindsight, like what a lucky spot to start. Because growing up here, again, back to like our separation, but very similar. Growing up here, being a surf turkey, again, I was very similar to you. We all were just super surf frothing kids, and we all dreamed about, it's when the heyday of surf was happening, and Quicksilver was right here, and Billabong was right here, and we all wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And we all knew of McElroy because we knew they were doing this cool stuff at that time. Volcom started shortly thereafter.
Yep.
We all wanted to be in it. I grew up right here. I grew up working in surf shops, and yet I never ended up in that space. And here's this kid from Detroit who comes out of school, ends up working for one of the premier, again, small when it started, but went on to be a very big organization and very influential.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then that keep going. It's just, I just wanted to shine a light on like how cool that you came 2,500 miles and took the jobs we all wanted growing up here.
And you know what? They were besides us surfing every day at lunch, and it was a very casual, very approachable kind of team. It was definitely competitive between some of us about who the lead art director and who was doing the mood board and the mock-ups and the style guides and all that stuff. But it was still very supportive. We're still all connected, and so many good memories and connections and experience from that.
Well, I think the other thing to kind of highlight is that surf has always been such a coveted domain to work in. And once you're in, you generally don't leave unless you have a better or different opportunity elsewhere. But a lot of the surf industry from 35 years ago is still doing similar stuff or periphery stuff that's related, right? Kind of like like your stuff, you're in, but in a different way. And I think a lot of those people that you could name that you worked with, they're still touching and influencing in that space, right?
Absolutely.
People don't leave it wholesale altogether unless something really significant happens.
Yeah.
Right?
And it was something really cool to where, for so long, I knew being out of the industry and I knew the magazine so well. And then my job was to create ads for the magazines I grew up reading.
Oh, no way. That's what you ended up doing with them?
Oh, yeah. No, my first job was working with Tim Richardson and Andrew Smits and Eddie Anaya and a group of us to build spread ads for vans. It had to make sure the action shot wasn't stuck in the gutter and had to look right, and their trim marks are, Tim Richardson was so good at being patient to teach us the little details of what makes good creative and good production so it can be reproduced and what have you. So learning about photography, and of course it was all slides at the time, and learning how to work with photographers from around the world. And so let's just say I was pinching myself a lot when a new, batch of Jeff Hornbaker photos would come in, after, traveling and working with Kelly, or I'm getting ahead of myself with Quicksilver, but this was the beginnings of getting to be on the inside of the industry that I was just being, aspiring to be a part of for so long.
So you didn't have a magic wand, but had you had big enough thoughts, had you had enough of if someone had really pinged you, something wild, I want to work in the surf industry, probably would have been there, but you probably also didn't have the wherewithal to even dream that big, perhaps, right? It seems like, especially when you're there, before you, that's so cool. What a great experience.
Pretty cool.
And how influential or how impactful were those guys that you named at McElroy on your career and on your life?
On my career? Well, I'm still, every day, every decision I make and everything, there's always a connection back to those guys teaching me some little aspect of it. Tim Richardson was my mentor out the door, and he helped me so much about, every day he'd show up with a stack of books or magazines, and he'd have them marked all the time to show like, oh, I've got this tear sheet and this inspiration and this and that. And he taught me to just be like, Scott, always be digging, always be, don't just let time be idle. Always be inspired by something, whether it's out in the street or it's in an alley or it's in a book or a magazine or on T-shirt graphics or in fashion. always be looking and post, tag stuff that just is inspiring. So it's so easy. My early days, my offices were just walls were covered with inspiration, whether it's for photo shoots or angles, for surf photography, or if it was color combinations or graphics or typography, you could just start listing the different worlds that any creative in any industry has that process of collect, gather, edit, kind of mix up, refine. You know what I mean? So it's just part of the process. So I would say I'm a visual junkie, and thank God it's gotten to where it's digital now, to where you can have your messy stacks of tear sheets just hidden in a folder on your desktop.
I would say
it's different now.
I would say yes, but I've had the luxury of being to your studio, and your studio is a functional working studio, and we'll share a photo of it. It's as if somebody could close their eyes and listen and draw a picture of what you just said about stuff, all inspiration and the way office looks and all the inspiration that is your studio.
It is.
Your studio is incredible. It is one of my favorite spaces. Like I would go hang out there. I'd pay to go hang out there. I might do that. Yeah, you should actually. It is so cool. Again, we'll share photos of it, and it's so inspirational. You can see the process in your space. In my opinion, it's so stinking cool. So, it definitely resonates. Again, there's a lot of foreshadowing. All that I can see what you're talking about 30 years later in your studio.
Yeah.
It's so cool. It's so neat. So let's keep going through it. You had mentioned Quicksilver, which was, you want to talk about Quick and how that happened?
So eventually a few of us who were there at Macquarie Communications got over to started working at Quicksilver in the early 2000s. It was probably 2001, 2002, I'm guessing. And so that was a time when the brand was really growing, and they were looking to create a small agency within, or creative service department within Quicksilver. So there's just a few select people who were doing catalog design and catalog shoots and whatever sales sheets they needed. Well, as the brand was blowing up and growing on a global level, there needed to be a central brand creative hub. And so I got to be part of that team working on all things, marketing / creative for Quicksilver. And that lasted for a good 12, 13 years.
You were there that long?
I was there that long.
Wow.
2 different times. I got laid off twice at Quicksilver.
Twice?
Not 3 times, which they were trying to get me back to go again, or trying to get me to go back. But Quicksilver was a time in my life from being still a young graphic designer and growing into an art director, where you really have to earn to understand every aspect of graphic design and communications and photos and photography and typography. Art direction was really being able to direct and manage and have concepts and figure out how it works in so many different applications. So art direction was something eventually Nadas Kappas, the skater, he gave me the opportunity to become art director there at Quicksilver, to where I start going on photo shoots, directing those shoots, doing all the editing, coming back, giving assets to the team to start building out ads and point of purchase displays for retail and billboards and all the different applications that we need to use them for. So
if I could jump in, my assumption is if you are named creative director for Quicksilver, the biggest surf brand at that time in the world, and that's still the heyday, you've arrived. To be given that position, that kind of power and influence, but to be given the reins on the creative side at Quick. I mean, am I wrong in saying like you've really made it in that?
Well, at this
world?
time, I was, like I said, I was still art director, and there were still, Quicksilver had a lot of creative input from different executives or managers from around the world, right? So there was the U.S., there was Europe, and there was Australia, exactly. So there were 3 different divisions that were all kind of doing some of the same stuff, so we'd have to work really tightly together. So as an art director at that time, before eventually I became creative director, I had to really earn it and really work with all aspects of creative within the company. So that's when I started traveling with the product developers. We'd go on these quote unquote inspiration trips where we got to shop a couple times a year. And we did something called, what did we call it? It was Urban and Earth, we would call it. So urban was where we'd go to a city around the world that had street influence, good retail. We'd see what fashion was like within the youth culture in the urban cities, if you will. And then we went to the Earth part. We'd go to surf destination, see what youth culture was like there, what were people wearing, what was the trends, what were happening. And so we would try to put those combinations and those contrasts together, but then put it through the Quicksilver brand filter. Who are we? We can't be another brand or be like everyone else or whatever is hot. And be able to put our findings and inspirations through the brand filter to come up with a unique point of view every season for Quicksilver. So it influenced the graphics, the apparel, the board short design, the hats, accessories, and eventually that art would be on hang tags, labels, and eventually into point of purchase displays in ads.
It's comprehensive what you guys
It's comprehensive.
And I'm guessing it was super fun. Traveling under the guise of work and doing that, dream.
It was the dream job, for sure. It was a dream job. And did that for probably 5 to 7 years.
Fantastic.
So it was wonderful. So we got to surf everywhere, travel everywhere, really learn how to look at different cultures and different, France had such a different way of wearing board shorts than the Aussies, and everyone just like, no, they need to be longer. No, the shorts need to be shorter. And it was just like, no, one logo, no, 2 logos and stripes and this and that. And so it was really hard to kind of look at what a global brand approach would be when you have so many different points of views.
Well, let me ask you this then. How important or how influential has travel been? We'll get back to this, but how big has travel been for you?
You know what? It's funny you ask that, because I think travel has always been my number one inspiration. Mm-hmm. But it's not just the act of traveling. It's the fact that I choose to really have my eyes open. I'm trying not to let things distract me, in the sense that I'm always trying to be observant wherever I go. So sure, I get lost in things, here in Newport, Costa Mesa, and day to day. But when you really travel, you get to drop that life and you get to just focus on what you don't know and really get to observe and learn and take it in. And then that's when my head starts I can't stop looking at architecture and signage and street art and what are the things on the streets called the utility,
like the manhole
covers.
I mean, the tree well covers. There's so many interesting things, right?
You go around the world and they're just different everywhere. And so Quicksilver helped me open my eyes. I traveled a lot as a kid, but Quicksilver gave me the opportunity to hey, Scott, you get to go put these goggles on. You get to go travel. Take your findings and your surroundings in just that, create a deck of not just your findings and stuff, but be able to edit it and then spit it out into a direction. And I had a team of people I got to work with to do that. And so that's a lifelong ability now that I've been given, to where if I'm just traveling with my family or my wife and it's just a road trip or something like that, I'm always the sucker who has to stop on the side of the road to take a photo of an old, billboard that's dilapidated, and I love half of it yanked off and the other half's still there, and it reminds me of this or that, or I'm a sucker
artifacts and souvenirs and
so
some
traveling,
foreshadowing.
And the cool thing too about traveling, which definitely is insightful into what I'm doing now, is that every place you go to has its own story. And of course, surfing is really each spot we would go surf has its own unique, we know how waves are different, but when you look at the topography, to how the setup is, to what structures are on there, is it a point break? Is it sand? Is it a left, a right, just what's all the elements that add up to what a spot has become, not just the wave itself, but all that is just so insightful to me to where I get colors and design and just inspiration from everywhere I go. And then I've learned in life to just how to like articulate it visually. And so
that's so rad. I love that. You know, it's really interesting. It made me think because one of your sons, Jax, is a lifeguard or was a lifeguard. My lifeguard experience, and we both, and we'll talk more about it, but we're friends with a lot of people that are lifeguards. And from my experience, and probably from Jax and from everybody else, when they go to the beach, they're always on. They're always watching. They're watching the people. No matter what beach, anywhere in the world, they're watching the people. They're watching the rips. They're watching the waves. They're always on. And it sounds like as an artist, you're always on. You're always looking for that billboard that has that element or that thing. Like, it sounds like you're always looking for that. And that's
except
so
we're not
cool.
saving lives
No,
like
we're not.
they are.
But maybe you're influencing them. Yeah, very different in that regard. But it sounds like your brain is always focused on, well, that's what
Just
our
being
eyes see.
alert,
Yeah.
being observant.
Or being engaged.
Yeah, being
right?
engaged, for sure.
That's super cool.
And I don't see it as a chore. I don't see it as a curse or something. I find it pleasurable. Like, I really enjoy unplugging and just going. You could send me anywhere. I wouldn't complain if you sent me anywhere. I'd find something unique about it.
Is your wife like, dude, we got to keep going. We got to come on. Like,
She's gotten used to it, and I've
bet.
gotten really good at a point and shoot camera. You know, before we had our phones, just having a point and shoot, be able to shoot from the hip. And so I'm documenting things half the time without interrupting the flow.
Got it. Yeah.
So it just
I can imagine.
happens.
Super cool. Well, after Quick, again, I don't want to truncate it too much, but you go on to another very big brand that was a rocket ship, still in great condition. But I mean, you had a talk about your next role.
So yeah, from Quicksilver, the crew over at Stance, when they were kicking off, I think
Stance
it was
socks.
2014, Stance Socks, 2014, 2015. They brought me onto the team as creative director, working with a handful of guys over there. And it was a little bizarre for me to say, hey, I'm going to go work for a sock company. And this is before what we know Stance as, and also all the competition that's out there now. You know, socks is just another great fashion, element to
But at the
what
time,
we
it was
wear.
like a greenfield, right? Like a white space.
It was a white space, and it's really interesting to be part. I really loved. I was intrigued by the thinking behind it, to where it was just a simple, untapped opportunity. And of course, this was a time again in youth culture to where shorts pants were slimmer. They were a little more flooded, so socks were really showing at the time. And so it really, if it was baggy jeans and covering down and covering your shoes, I don't think socks would have the attention that it does now. So the timing was perfect for that to peak out.
Yeah, I would always say that if somebody gets me a pair of socks for Christmas or my birthday, I'm like, socks? But at that time, we were buying socks for everybody. They were so innovative. This is the time, like 10 years ago, everything was colored and styles, and you could buy a 3-pack. Remember, it wasn't
for sure.
Because they all didn't match, and my kids were all wearing them, and I was wearing them, and my dad was wearing them. It was like a juggernaut. It was something new. And I always say in my industry, I've got retail stores. People have to come to me to buy stuff. But whoever comes up, it's like coming up with the next bottle cap. Like, we're going to make this socks hot, and you can put them in every store that sells clothing in America. Like, who would have thunk?
And it was genius having them right there at the cash wrap. It was an easy kind of add-on kind of grab. And I was lucky enough to get to work there for 5.5 years. Creative director doing, again, seasonal, conceptual things for campaigns, for product application, working with artists on who we'd collaborate with and what that kind of relationship looked like. Eventually, I got into retail. There at Stance, as they had a pretty aggressive plan to start opening retail stores all over the U.S., eventually over the world, but having to start developing store number one. What materials are we using? What's the feel? What's the vibe? It needs to be more of an experience, not just throwing things up on the wall. And then how do you display pairs of socks? And all we have is socks in the store. So it became a real challenge to figure out point of purchase displays and racks and pegs and displays and how to have different categories. As stance was growing, there were segmentations happening. And that's just where different socks for different activities and different people, whether it was sport, athletic socks, or it was someone dressing up and needed something a little more, high end. So there's different segmentations. So again, you're talking to different audiences. You're kind of wearing something different. So the photography and the visual direction had to be different.
But all your experience from McElroy and Quick, did it prepare you well for your role of being really into the ground level and developing like your retail stores and point of purchase and everything when you got to Stance?
Absolutely. Again, but it did give me new opportunities to understand. This is where I really started learning about merchandising and how to really create simple product lines that weren't just over skewed out to where you just have too many styles and you're overwhelmed and it just starts clogging your production to what you're trying to do. So really trying to have discipline and practice into editing your lines down.
I swear, I'm gonna just asterisk all this foreshadowing yet again.
Foreshadow.
For sure, right? So rad. So interesting how all those dots get connected.
And something I'd like to share is that, and so I've been mentoring with the Newport Harbor High School junior program. So every year, a student who signs up to volunteer or to be a mentee gets locked up or partnered with a local business owner or individual. And so for the last 7 or 8 years, I've been a mentor and get to take a high school kid around, spend time in the studio and work and what have you. But something I'm always encouraging them is no matter where you go, try to learn something from where you're at. So every job I was at, not only was I learning what my responsibilities were and what I had to deliver, but I would go and spend time with the sales department or merchandise or design and really get to know what their roles are, what they do, how do we connect somehow. Because I was told that the better you are, the more you know, the better asset you are for the company you're working for. So it's a no-brainer, but you got to encourage people. If you don't know, you're just thinking about your job, 9 to 5, and you're done, you're checked out. But the more you start learning different aspects of the business, it completely prepared me for where I'm at now.
That's so cool. Yeah, and that's it. Like I would take that and sprinkle that, what you just said, and sprinkle it on all of our kids, because the more you know, there's so many little adages, like it's not what you know, it's who you know. I always tell my kids, no. It's what you know, and then it's who you know.
Sure,
but you're not going to get where you want to go by just knowing someone. You got to have something to provide that's valuable and more valuable than the other 87 kids that they know.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
The more you can learn, the more you can glean, the more that's such good advice. I'm so cool. I'm so glad you're doing that. I didn't know that was a program they had. So that's really cool.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, I bet whoever's had the opportunity to be your mentee, they've got to come out with some really good stuff. That's really cool. So you're at Stance. What happens? Again, we're kind of truncating. What happens then? How long are you there? Where do you go?
So I think, being at Stance, I felt like my career was getting to a point where I felt like I didn't have any more to prove. I felt like I offered everything I could. It just started feeling like a job at halfway through my time at Stance. And so I wasn't feeling like I was creatively fulfilled. And so I've always had an art studio I've kept beyond wherever I've worked. So I've always drawn and painted after I put the kids to bed, kiss my wife goodnight. I would go spend a few hours in my studio.
I love that. Is that at your house or somewhere else?
No, separate studio is where you've seen my studio
the museum
now.
Or whatever, or you have a separate.
It's just become that. No, my studio has just become a catch-all for everything.
Hold on, so you always had your current studio? You've had it up where it is for a long time?
Not in different locations.
Got it. Okay.
There's been some up on Placentia over where Alex Nose had a little gallery, and then further up on Baker and where.
But you've always had a spot for you to leave the house
studio
and go. Wife and kids go down. Wife's like, Go, honey, go do your thing, and that's your cathartic.
And so when I was still at Quicksilver, I'd be spreading out my projects. And this was late night. There were times I'd be coming home at 2 a.m. with new tear sheets and notes and storyboards on what we were going to do in Mexico 2 weeks later for Quicksilver. And so I was always prepping. And it wasn't just to where, I mean, I was always painting on stuff, or I'd be stitching pages together, or, you know, it wasn't just like I was just putting notes down and it was a really nice little sheet of paper. I always had to be doodling and drawing and sketching and cutting and pasting and all that. So I've always been a hands-on analog kind of guy.
But you're doing this at work all day, going home and spending family time, and then you're going back and doing it more. So you're like fully immersed.
I was fully immersed
full
in
blown.
it, for sure.
Wow.
So the art studio, so when I was at Stance and I was starting to just kind of like, all right, I need more creative fulfillment. I was painting at the studio one night and I started painting on some, do you want me to get into this now?
Well, yeah, let's go. So we're going into,
Let
me ask you this
yes.
before we get in, because that's going to lead us right into Slightly Choppy. You had mentioned it before that you were laid off twice from Quicksilver. What was and at Stance, you said you were kind of ready to look for something different, but by being laid off, was that formative in any way for you? Did that teach you anything? Did it piss you off, or did it inform you of anything? Was it did that have any impact? And maybe that's again foreshadowing towards, did that have an impact to you going, I don't want to ever get laid off again, so I'm going to go do something else?
You know what? My wife's a school teacher, and so I knew her job was stable. When I got laid off, my kids were always hurt the most out of it because they were bummed I wasn't going to work there anymore. And then I didn't like the fact that I was taken away from my daily routine and my friends, and like, I've always done a good job and always delivered. But business is just a funny thing. And all of a sudden, when people just have to be crossed off and they're not going to be part of the team anymore, it definitely devastated me for the first 24 hours. And then I learned to just dust myself off, have confidence in what I've been able to build up to that point, and say, you know what, there's someone out there that needs the skills and talent I have. I just got to go find them. I just got to make the connection. So after the first time being laid off at Quicksilver, I went to work for a fashion basics brand called Alternative Apparel in downtown LA. And that was working with a bunch of strangers. Wasn't surf related. It was fashion, but they were like, you're the creative director. We need a new brand. We need this and that. And it was like a clean slate for me to be able to just apply everything, just have the confidence in myself to do it because they were letting me just do it. So I got to do that for 2 years, and that was the most rewarding process until Quicksilver kept calling me. Hey, things have changed. We need you back down here. So after 2 years at Alternative, I went back to Quicksilver for another 2-3 years, if you will. So did it teach me anything? Yeah. No, I mean, it really taught me to where, you know, it's okay to be bummed on things when it's out of your control. It's just natural to not feel great about it. But then to have the confidence in, if you've put in the hard work, you should be able to be confident enough to go out and succeed. And it may take time or not go in the direction you want. But I've been laid off at half the jobs in my career, and I was able to dust myself off, let my kids see me do it and do it gracefully. You know, my wife was like, oh, thank God, we need another paycheck. We need a paycheck. So she was more putting that pressure on. And I wanted to just work somewhere where I was inspired. I wanted to really believe in the brands I was working for. So I've never worked for a brand that I didn't believe in. And I'm person that's full hook, line, and sinker into it and love it. And I have to understand it to be able to deliver for them. So getting laid off just makes you more, just gives you more energy, more strength, and builds your confidence once you can get over that fact that you've been let go.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, we had talked a little bit offline, and you know, there's a message in there that you'll hear any pro athlete, any big business person, they're like, success comes from your failures.
Sure.
Not that it's a failure, especially in that industry at the time, like they're rocket ships and they bring in investors and they have to there's so many other elements. That's why you were brought back.
Yeah.
But dusting yourself off the way you said, with resilience and confidence and just going after it and having, like, that's the answer that I think everybody, again, I'll sprinkle that on some people too.
Yeah.
That's really good feedback.
Yeah.
Okay. So now this brings us to what you're doing today. Let's talk
So let
slightly
me tell
choppy.
you. Let me tell you. Back
Oh,
in
sure.
my first studio, because I was painting the night before, another friend, Randy Hild, who we worked together at Quicksilver, was visiting my studio and saw some new art pieces I was working on. But I was literally taking, scraps of fabric and rugs and curtains and just things that I liked these materials, and started chopping them up, sewing them together, started painting and stenciling on them. And I've always loved typography. I've always loved doing hand-done signage and lettering and typefaces and stuff. People call them fonts, so they're like fonts, if you will. So I just started putting together some cool found little flags or burgees and just try to make them look.
What's a burgee, just for the audience sake?
So a burgee is a triangle-shaped pennant, double-sided. It's usually made of nylon or polyester or something synthetic, and you hang it on your boat. It identifies a club you're part of, or it's unique to your boat or your tribe or your family or what have you. So that's a burgee.
I had never known what it was until I got a bunch of burgees from you for the Newport Aquatic Center, for the board and some other people that were doing really good work. And one of the guys goes, "Oh, it's a burgee." I'm like, "No, it's a flag." He's like, "No, it's a burgee." I had never heard that term before. So now thank you for educating everybody, but I learned through the slightly choppy process.
Some people see what I'm doing and like, "Oh, that's a burgee." But flags can be rectangle, they could be swallowtail, they could be pennant shaped. There's felt pennants that we all know from the 40s and 50s, Just the felt pennant is the long shaped triangle flag. And then you can have all kinds of rectangle flags, just like the ones we see when black ball goes up down at the lifeguard tower. So there's all types. And flags weren't necessarily a passion I had. It was more of, I just started making, so I've always painted. I've traveled, done art shows, did something called The Happening way back when artists, musicians, and filmmakers were curated together, and that show would travel all over the world. And so I was in the art surf world, if you will. And so I've always been making series and collections of things. So this time I just started painting our local surf spots, whether it was Wedge or 6th Street or schoolyards or
Is that what Randy Hild saw in your studio?
So he saw my first 3 like little prototypes sitting on the floor and thought I found those at some local antique shop or something. So he thought they were real, and it just he goes, "I think you're onto something there." And so I remember how crude they were. I still have them. They're hilarious. But they're almost like unfinished relics that are just so, it doesn't look like much skill or craft is in there, but they're just raw ideas that just kind of launched Slightly Choppy. So Slightly Choppy was originally a saying that I just used for surf terminology. And like I said, I always put type and words in my art. So years ago, I had a Slightly Choppy painting that Randy Hild actually has hanging in his house. But Slightly Choppy is also my artistic approach to where there's drips, there's pencil marks, there's scratches and stains. So it's somewhat imperfect. It's choppy. It's not pretty and polished. So I love that kind of that energy between the two meanings of Slightly Choppy, which I love. But so I was making these in the studio, and I slowly started to sell them at a couple local retail shops and just kind of see what happens, doing small runs, maybe 1, 2 of each design. And we were just doing our local spots here. And so started getting some traction, and I'm still at Stance, still working at Stance.
Oh, so this was just a side
This was
hustle,
a side
not even
hustle.
Was at that point, was it even a hustle, or is it still just like formative hobby?
It wasn't yet, but then I started being working for other brands and other companies. I'd be crazy not to figure out a way to make this my new art, my new project, if you will. And so when I started posting on my Instagram, and Instagram was very crude back then. It was still very new, and just
We're talking like 10 years ago. Is that about right?
Yeah.
When this was?
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably 10. Yeah. It's been 9. Next May, it'll be 10 years.
Ooh, big party coming. I feel
Big
it.
party. Got to start thinking about that.
Right.
But But then I started selling a few to some local shops, and then I built a website and started selling a few on the website. So it was showing some promise that this could be something. Eventually, I got laid off at Stance. I got the call, and I was no longer needed. And this was the first time I didn't get my portfolio ready and my resume ready and try to like figure out what my plan was. I went to my family that night, that next day basically, and said, I'm doing Slightly Choppy full time. I got to have a little bit of time to make this work. So the family was very supportive. The kids were already like, Dad, you got this. This is so cool. You could do it. They were bummed I wasn't getting socks anymore, board shorts or what have you from the past jobs. But they were fired up because boys were always with me on adventures and exploring. And if I'm driving, I have one of the boys start writing notes down or sketch this. So they've always been part of Slightly Choppy. Different roles, but they've been right there since day one, which is awesome.
Love that.
So I got laid off at Stance. The very next day, launched Slightly Choppy full on, and I haven't looked back.
Thank goodness. Because, listen, the reason you're here and the reason I know you is because of Slightly Choppy, because of your business. And I'm not blowing smoke here. What you've done is one of my favorite things. And I always think of it this way when I think of you and see your studio. Like, if I could be a commercial artist doing something, like, it would be what you're doing. Now, I would never have been able to, for the reasons I talked about earlier, I never would have figured it out on my own. I love history of surf so much. I love nostalgia. Yeah. I love that artsy, kitschy. It is so freaking cool. And I give you huge praise on how you've done it. It's so cool. Just a couple of things. You're like my favorite gift to give. I mentioned it, the Newport Aquatic Center earlier. I'm always sending people your stuff. Not always, but certainly I've done quite a few. And I'm always going, oh, that one, I got to send that to so-and-so. I love it. It's so cool. We have them in our house. I have them in my office. My kids have them in their houses up in college. Like, it's just, we all collectively love Slightly Choppy. It's such good stuff. I can't wait to share the photos. Your studio, as I mentioned earlier, is incredible. And you're also really involved in the community of Newport Beach. And you've really, like, when you go to the Redo Market, I don't know if we talked about it, the Redo Market in Dana Point, which goes on, what, twice a year?
Yep, twice a year.
Yours is always the busiest booth. Like, you're there working, I'm walking. Like, you're always like a magnet. It's really impressive what you've done because it's so stinking cool.
I appreciate that. You know, I am blessed that it's turned out to be something that it has. It's been a culmination of all these experiences and all these years. And I am so grateful for the 20 years of working in the industry that I was such a fan of. And I felt like I got to go to school for 20 years and get paid doing it and raise my family while I was doing it. And now I'm able to just go back. Sure, I have to do every aspect of the business. Not all aspects I love, but I figure out a way to make it work. And I'm so grateful that I've got to learn those different skills through working in the industry. So it's pretty cool that I get to do it now. And I don't have to necessarily travel around the world to get inspiration anymore. So I get to pull, for the longest time, I was proud to be based in Newport Beach because of the rich history of boating, surfing, fishing, blue collar town where guys were shaping boards when you think of Joe Quigg and Pat Curran, and then you think of all the boat makers and sail makers. And
well, I was going to mention that where your studio is. Tell people where your studio is and a bit about the history of that area, because you're in, like, so it's so fitting where you are.
Yeah. So my surroundings definitely inspired the spirit of my brand. So sitting on the peninsula at Newport Beach, it's in a little area called the Cannery Village. And of course, it looks completely different now than it did 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But it was my favorite little, I love, when I travel, I don't like to go on the busy streets. I like to go through the back alleys and just get lost to find something new and inspiring. And so the Cannery Village was that for me for many years. You know, when you look at where Lido Marina Village is now, man, that was a ghost town. Yeah. And I loved it. I'd go to the bookstore for a bit. I'd ride my bike down that cobblestone road and the warehouse was still there. And there was nothing else really. The bookshop and the warehouse. And so Newport was that little setting, if you will. So back to my film days, settings and production design, it's the narrative. It's part of the fabric and the story of who you are, what you make, who you interact with, what you do every day. The Cannery Village was kind of like my base and the part of the narrative of where I'm set, what I'm creating, what I'm making. It was, not to sound cheesy, but it was like I was trying to channel the spirit of all the craftsmen that were working down there, the 40s, 50s, and 60s, you know? So it's been a real cool, ideal setting to be in an old boat shed, you know, to where that spirit of that place and just the crude surroundings and the few artifacts that I bring in that I find inspiring all get fed through what I'm doing. So the typography, the colors, the patina on things, all that is informative. And so the surrounding is so vital to the brand and to the storytelling of what I've been doing. But it's really connected. People have really responded to, they love the romance of it. And I'm as authentic as I can be because I don't want to come across something that I'm not, just because I don't know how to be that way. I don't, like, what you see is what you get, in the sense of what we make is as true and honest and raw that we can make it. And we hope and then people connect to it. And we try to make artifacts that are gonna last a long time. And it's not just something that's artfully made by a group of artists and crafted, but it connects to an emotional place for people, place or an event or something like that. And so people seem to really gravitate towards them, to the flags and other things that we create because of that heartfelt craftsmanship that's in part of it. So does that make sense?
100%. Well, what's art supposed to do? It's supposed to inspire, and I mean, you're the artist. What's art supposed to do? Because I think what you just described that Slightly Choppy is doing is what art is supposed to do.
It's supposed to, and that's what gives me the energy and the hope and the excitement to get up the next day, to not just keep putting out things that we love, but it's so gratifying to get feedback or responses from people or reviews or little notes about how stoked someone was, even to bring in tears to people, because these connect people to their favorite things.
For sure.
You know, which is awesome. So,
well, and you think so the other thing is you've been well received and adopted by a lot of the local, very, very well-known interior designers. And so some of the more surfy, salty, not kitschy in a very good, like, I don't know what super high-end kitschy would be, but your stuff graces some of the best designers, most well-known, sought-after designers here in town. In some of the most beautiful homes, there's Slightly Choppy stuff that they're using, right? Like Riley Klassen and others.
Sure,
and I think you're in books with these folks. So, I mean, that's a huge shot in the arm as well, right?
It is, yeah. No, it's a cool, I think people enjoy it more than I do myself. I think it makes my family proud, my parents and my kids, and makes them all proud to see, like, wow, you must be doing something right for them to include you into that, you know?
You are. For sure.
I thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, and one of the other things that ties us is we had talked about it offline, but I'm going to ask you to talk about it. Ben Carlson Foundation is something you're very familiar with. You share an office building with Jake Jans, who's on the board, and brother-in-law to Ben Carlson that passed away, the lifeguard that passed away here. But you make the pennants for the Ben Did Go paddle that we do. And I'm very proud to have some of those up on the wall. And you just started doing all the retroactive ones for everybody, and everybody's super fired up to be able to get a Ben Did Go Slightly Choppy pennant for each of the years that they've done that event.
Yeah.
So
well, that makes me proud to be part of something like that. That's really from a tragedy into such an amazing foundation that has the spirit that just inspires and empowers other people around the world. When you start seeing what the foundation's done. And so I'm just playing a small part of it, to where people have a tangible thing hanging that just reminds them of either Ben or, you know, something that they've accomplished, or the spirit that, hey, Ben did it, I can do it. And so I'm just lucky enough to be able to get to put these together to where it continues the mission of the foundation and the spirit of who Ben was. So it's pretty cool.
Well, it's been great to have you a partner on that. But again, as you said, like, I used to, where Scott's office is where the board of directors for Ben Carlson Foundation meets, and he used to see us on a regular basis, and it was always just cool. But I always hoped when I would go to those meetings that Scott's door open. I want to go up and look in the studio because I love your space. We're getting near the end here, Scott, but a couple questions. Who, if anyone, had the most or has the most impact on you? You're mentoring young people. Who maybe mentored you and helped you get where you're going? Or maybe what did you get from that? You talked a lot about people, and you sounded like you were quite a bit of a sponge, but was there anybody in particular or people in particular that really kind of helped you get where you are today?
Different chapters in my life. One of my childhood friends, his dad was very influential to giving me one of my first restaurant jobs, but he was the one who really taught me a really good work ethic that I feel like I've continued to this day. And then, like I mentioned before, Tim Richardson was a mentor back in the days of really taking someone very green, but very excited to get to dig in and get to work. So Tim, and then the latest, Randy Hild has been a huge influence. I hate to be popping names, but Randy is a guy that's inspired me from day one to whatever you do, keep it fun, keep it authentic, keep it cool, and keep it rare. Like, I love it when there's so many opportunities to keep growing Slightly Choppy bigger. And right now it's enough because it gives me everything that my family and I need. And just knowing when's enough, and having friends that really try to keep me grounded. And Randy's been somebody who's just constantly patting me on my back. He doesn't really have to push me hard in one direction or another, but just seeing him at the flea markets or an event or here and there, it's really cool to have people to just kind of like reinforce what I'm feeling and not to always push me into a place where I shouldn't be.
That's so great. It's so great to have people like that. And again, I think it's wonderful that you're providing that to some of these young folks at the high school right here. Gosh, I think that people are going to want to, if they aren't familiar with it already, you're going to want to know where they can find you and go see this stuff. Your website's awesome, your Instagram. You want to tell people where they can find you?
So it's slightlychoppy.com is the website. A little plug there.
Yeah.
But the website is pretty much like our retail window. We just have our private studio, but then we do have some select retail stores that we've partnered with since early days, and they're all relationship-based retail. So Almond Surfboards here in Costa Mesa was our first account. Thalia Surf down in Laguna Beach. There's a place called CV's in Santa Barbara and Newport Beach as well. Another local shop, 15th Street Surf Shop. Very small family-run business that's, just very approachable and fun. There's some shops. Where else? A place down in Solana Beach, Hobie Surf Shops.
Oh, awesome.
There's a couple places back in Nantucket in New York.
Wow.
And then Milo and Surf Camp in Hawaii.
Super cool.
It's all right now on the coast, and we've
Awesome.
been moving very slowly through building retail. It's important for us to have a good relationship. It needs to be beneficial both ways and just really, associated with the right other objects or products that are there. It needs to be some shared brand values for it to make sense.
Well, it really sounds like you've taken everything that you learned and experienced all the way through McElroy, Quicksilver, Stance, Alternative, all these things you've learned, the things that you like, the things you don't like, what's important to you, what's not important, and you've been able to apply that all here, and you're like, I'm growing at the rate I want to grow. I don't need to be pushed into growing bigger. It's a relationship-driven business, which I love. We're the same way. It's so cool. I mean, so let me ask you this, and then we're gonna turn it off. You've built this business. It's based on you. It's in your vision. It's your mind. It's your family. Where does that put you, Scott, today versus that kid in Detroit? Do you think you ever would have dreamed of this?
You know what? I think this was my dream in a weird way, because there were so many times where I was just landlocked and stuck being a teenager, confused and listening to the Smiths or the Cure at some point, wishing I was out here. I know that sounds crazy, but it's like I almost feel like in a weird way I dreamed it and I just made it happen. And it just, it's kind of like a wash machine. You know, I've always heard like you spin out of control but land back on your feet. And it's kind of like the whole career has been this journey that it's all added up to what I am doing now, but it almost seems like this is what I've always meant to be doing. So
hallelujah.
I'm pretty blessed. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
That's so great, Scott. Hey, listen, Scott Richards, thank you so much for being here, sharing your story. I know we dug around all around it. I love the story. I love what you've done and the path that it's taken to get you from where you were and through the business and to Slightly Choppy today. What a cool story. Thank you so much for sharing
having me.
Yeah, this was
appreciate
rad.
it.
Thanks, buddy.
Right on.